Hey everyone, and thanks for taking the time to check out this video. For today's viewer requested presentation, I'm going to be doing another installment to my show and tell series. And as you have no doubt already deduced, today we're looking at some AKs. Good news, bad news. The bad news is I don't have nearly as many AKs as I have SKSs. I don't have nearly as many anything as I have SKSs. But the good news is that of the 5 I do have, I think I've got some pretty cool examples, and I'm looking forward to showing them to you. I try not to waste time on this channel, but before we dive in, I do want to hit 2 brief housekeeping notes for my regular viewers. As always, I'll keep them short and sweet, but of course, if you want to just skip ahead to the good part, I've got everything broken up into chapters. You can find that below. First note, by the time this video airs, we are going to be at 5,000 subscribers, and I just want to offer a heartfelt thank you to all of you who have made that possible. Because of this channel, I've been fortunate enough to have thousands of positive interactions with SKS enthusiasts and others from all over the world. I think that's just great, so once again, thank you. Second housekeeping note, I just want to apologize to my regular viewers for my recent delays in content production. I know this sounds ridiculous, but on a recent trip to the Gulf Coast of Texas, I ended up hospitalized for the better part of a week with neurotoxic Ciguatera poisoning, most likely as the result of eating the eyeballs of fresh-caught red snapper. And I already know what you're wondering, Triangle, did you do this to impress a girl? And yes, obviously that's why I did it. Whether or not I was successful in that endeavor, or for that matter, what I was trying to do, impressing a girl who I've been with for 5 years already, is unfortunately immaterial at this point, because Ciguatera is an absolutely brutal illness. And while I am feeling a lot better than I was a week ago, I'm still recovering. To be honest with you, it's still pretty rough. It goes up and down, and I might not be at 100% for some weeks to come. I am okay, and I'm going to do my best to get back on schedule, but just so you know, that's what happened and is still happening. Housekeeping aside, let's talk AKs. So one thing that will make this show and tell different from my SKS show and tell, other than just the quantity of pieces, is that unlike the SKS, the AK for me is a dual interest firearm. What that means is that I approach the AK both as a collector, motivated by historical curiosity, and as a responsibly armed citizen, motivated by utilitarian practicality. In other words, while I don't personally have a go-to SKS setup for serious use, and by the way, I'm not saying the SKS can't fill that role, obviously it can, I'm just saying that's not what I personally use them for, I absolutely do have go-to AKs, and as we go through the lineup, you will probably notice me swapping between my collector hat and my shooter hat. I just thought that would be interesting to mention before we begin because it's a little different from what I did before. Without further ado, let's take a look at the first rifle. First up is going to be my Russian mullet VEPR, and specifically this is a Fime Group AK-4711. There's a great story that comes with this one, but before anything else, let's just take a moment to model good safety practices by verifying that this weapon is safe and clear. That is an empty magazine, nothing in the chamber, and nothing on the bolt face. Also, I suppose this is as good of a time as any to take advantage of my new microphone and hopefully give you guys some nice action sounds. This is a very smooth rifle for being a stamped AK, although it probably helps that I have thousands and thousands of rounds through it. We'll also go ahead and feel that trigger. We got a light take up to what feels like a firm wall, and then we push through that wall and it's spongy, and we have a light and pretty unpredictable break, and the reset is pretty positive. Not my personal favorite type of trigger, but it does get the job done. So what do we have here? I will probably talk about this one more than any other rifle because I think there's a few interesting points I want to hit. And let's start with a historical approach to the mullet factory. Mullet is the Russian word for hammer, and the Mullet Arms Factory was established in Zagorsk in 1940. Following the Nazi invasion in 1941, the factory was evacuated to Vyatsky Polyani, I'm sure I butchered that, where it remains today. During World War II, Mullet was the primary producer of the Spagan-designed Papasha, or PPSH-41 submachine gun, one of the most heavily used subguns during the war. Just as another interesting historical note, one young designer who was briefly employed at Mullet during wartime was one Nikolai Makarov, who in the post-war years would win the national competition to replace the Tokarev pistol, and of course we know his winning design today as the Pistolet Makarova, the PM, or just the Makarov. Back to the Mullet factory, however. After World War II, Mullet continued to make weapons for the Soviet Red Army and later the Russian Federation. And one of their most notable product lines was the Kalashnikov-designed RPK light machine gun, which is essentially just a standard AK which has been heavily reinforced to tolerate sustained fully automatic fire. For my military guys, the RPK basically fills the same role as the M249 squad automatic weapon, although unlike the SAW, it shares much greater parts and manual of arms compatibility with the infantry carbines it was designed to support. Either way, the main differences between an RPK and an equivalent generation AK are a thicker receiver stamping, generally 1.5 millimeters as opposed to 1.0 millimeters, a reinforced and bulged front trunnion, we can see that iconic and easily recognizable bulge here, and of course a thicker, heavier profile and generally much longer barrel profile, which functions as a heatsink. Obviously, this adds significant weight to the weapon, but in return for that weight penalty, you get the ability to tolerate much more demanding firing schedules without degrading the weapon system. So why am I talking about an RPK while pointing at a mullet VEPR? Well, following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of the modern Russian Federation, Mullet began to manufacture semi-automatic sporting variants of the RPK, which they marketed under the VEPR name, which is the Russian word for wild boar. The VEPR was available in a wide range of calibers and configurations, although the vast majority imported into the United States included slant-back receivers and neutered magazine wells, which allowed them to conform to U.S. Code 925D3 and therefore be importable as sporting weapons. For many years, the VEPRs were cheap and readily available, and sales were relatively sluggish as they were competing directly with products from Izhmash and later Kalashnikov concern, most of which were lighter and more recognizable to U.S. consumers. That all changed in 2014, however, when Russia annexed Crimea and was hit with U.S. State Department sanctions, which targeted most Russian AK exporters, but not Molat, interestingly enough. As far as I can tell, Molat genuinely just slipped through the cracks. In any case, the consequence of this was that from 2014 to 2017, the VEPR was pretty much the only Russian factory AK available in the US on the primary market, and its popularity increased commensurately. In late 2016, Las Vegas-based Fime Group began to offer their FM series of mullet VEPRs, which were 922R compliant conversions of flat-backed mullet receivers, which accepted standard AK pattern magazines and RPK pattern furniture. These weapons were offered in a few calibers and configurations, although the one that appealed the most to 22-year-old me was the most basic model, the 16-inch barreled, fixed stock FM AK-4711. For whatever it's worth, this is probably as good of a time as any to point out that all of my intermediate chambered AKs are in 7.62 by 39 for logistic simplicity with my SKS collecting habit. In any case, the price for this rifle at the time I ordered it was $900, which at the time I considered to be exorbitant. However, I had always wanted a genuine Russian AK, and I figured I'd better get one while I could. I had some money in my pocket, so I just sucked it up and bit the bullet. And as it turns out, the State Department actually announced sanctions on Mullet while this rifle was in transit from Fime Group to my FFL, so by the time I received the transfer, the market value of my new rifle had nearly doubled. Every firearm collector experienced wins and losses, but this purchase was definitely a win for me. So I know I've rattled on for some time about the history of this rifle, so let's try to speed things up and talk about this rifle itself. Once upon a time, this rifle was in my serious use training rotation. However, today it's retired and mostly a beater and range toy. That's not to say it's worn out. This thing will probably outlive me by several generations still. However, for a combination of reasons, it's just not my go-to AK anymore. That said, I love the history that it connects me to, and at the end of the day, it's still a factory-built Russian AK, so I have no plans of letting it go anytime soon. In terms of personalizations, you can see I've changed up the furniture a little bit, and I guess the only thing I'll emphasize here is compatibility, as that might be useful to some viewers. Like I said, FM VEPRs take RPK pattern furniture. However, RPK pattern and AK pattern upper handguards are exactly the same, so no worries there. AK pattern buttstocks will work in an RPK if you fit them with a file and sandpaper, and really the part that you actually have to pay attention to is going to be the lower handguard. For that, I've got a drop-in VEPR/RPK specific M-LOK product made by TDI, and it works great. On that handguard, I've got an Arisaka vertical foregrip and a bit of Picatinny rail for a white light. I guess the only other accessory of note is going to be the optic, and this is a Holosun 403R riding on a Midwest Industries mount. It's a budget-friendly but highly effective solution. Obviously, if price were no issue, I would have some other optic on here, but honestly, I really do love the 403Rs, and they are my go-to optic for all of my second-tier rifles. Other than that, I guess the last thing to really emphasize is that this is an absolute tank of a rifle, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. I know that when you're just looking at pictures or seeing me holding it, it looks like I'm just holding a standard AK footprint, and this is a standard AK footprint, but keep in mind this is actually an RPK light machine gun with a neutered fire control group and a 16-inch heavy profile barrel, and you can really feel that when you bring this up in your hands. In terms of the good, it soaks up recoil and handles heat exceptionally well, which contributes to overall longevity. In terms of the bad, it's heavy, and honestly, I don't think the benefits I just named really make up for that extra weight. At the end of the day, there is a reason the AK and the RPK were built differently, so squeezing an RPK into an AK roll mostly just gives you an unnecessarily heavy AK. In summary, this is an absolute tank. It's a genuine Russian AK with rich historical pedigree, and it was a very lucky purchase for me, but from a practical perspective, it's also a bit heavy for something that pretty much does exactly what lighter AKs also do. I love it to death, but it's not perfect, so let's move on to the next AK. All right, next up is going to be my other Russian AK, although technically this one would be better described as Soviet, because it is indeed a 1965 Izhevsk produced AKM. I won't have quite as much to say about this rifle, as in many ways I think it speaks for itself, but let's go ahead first and verify that this is a safe weapon. That is an empty magazine, that is an empty chamber, and we've got nothing on our bolt face. And as always, let's go ahead and let you hear that action, which I will say is also remarkably smooth for being a stamped gun. And finally, let's go ahead and feel that trigger press. Very light trigger, almost no take up. We get straight into a spongy break with absolutely no wall or predictability there. Once again, this is not a trigger that you stage. This is a trigger that you lightly make contact with and you press through when you're ready to make your shot. Again, not my favorite trigger, but it totally gets the job done. So this particular rifle was built by Atlantic Firearms using a matching Soviet parts kit, a fairly clone-correct Childers receiver, and a Polish-made cold hammer-forged chrome-lined barrel. I don't honestly have a lot of experience with Atlantic Firearms, but I have to say I am very impressed with the build quality of this rifle. They did a great job inside and out. By the way, I'll add that this is actually one of my most recent acquisitions. At the time of filming, I believe these are still offered for sale by Atlantic Firearms. So if you got $2,000 burning a hole in your pocket, just something to consider. So what can we say about this rifle? Well, I guess I'll start by saying that honestly, this was something of a grail gun for me, meaning a firearm variant that I've wanted to have in my collection for a long, long time. Even when I bought my VEPR back in 2017, I was primarily motivated because I wanted to have a Russian AK. Well, as far as I'm concerned, this isn't just a Russian AK, this is the Russian AK, or at least as close to the Russian AK as I can realistically expect to get. Listen, I get it. There are a lot of iconic Russian and Soviet AK variants. The Type 3, the 74M, the Krink, the 105. But can we not all agree that the king of them all, maybe not in terms of performance, but certainly in terms of significance, is the AKM? I mean, come on, this is arguably the most successful and iconic small arm in human history. There are African tribesmen who have never seen commercially produced soap before who know how to field strip this particular weapon. Since its adoption by the USSR in 1959, it's appeared in virtually every armed conflict that followed. Check out this map of countries that have formally adopted the AKM. Like I said, it speaks for itself. So that's what this rifle is to me, a reference piece for my historically oriented collection. It's something that brings me a ton of joy to own and even more joy to share with others. From experienced AK enthusiasts to total firearm novices, this is a weapon which can help just about anyone feel connected to something bigger than themselves, and that's ultimately why I love collecting firearms. They can transport us to different times and places, they can encourage us to reflect on and learn from history in new ways, and perhaps most importantly, they can help us cultivate empathy for people we will never meet. This is a weapon which has been used by heroes, villains, and a whole lot of people who fall somewhere in the middle, but at the end of the day, it's an inarguably potent piece of the human story, and that's really cool to own. Also, like many of you, I have a particular affection and affliction for Eastern small arms collecting. I really like the Izhevsk factory in particular, and in many ways this rifle just epitomizes those distinctly Slavic mechanical and aesthetic qualities. My significant other's parents actually grew up in the Soviet Union. I'm repping their Moscow State University t-shirt today, and they learned to field strip this rifle in grade school when I was learning cup stacking, so there's a bit of a familial connection there as well. That said, there's really nothing unique about that. Again, the distinct characteristic of the AKM is its raw universality. Pretty much everyone has a familial connection to it if you're paying attention. Other than that, I don't think I have a whole lot more to say about this AKM. Obviously, we could nerd out about all the early and transitional elements that go into a 1965 AKM, the gas block, the milled sling swivel, stuff like that. We could talk about the rich history of the Izhevsk factory. That's one of my favorite subjects. But really, those are such big topics, I'd rather save them for another day. Until then, I'll just summarize by saying that this is pretty much as close as I can currently get to a true Soviet factory-built AKM. I'm very happy with it. Obviously, I'll be leaving it in this historically accurate configuration, and it's truly one of the most valued pieces in my collection. All right, next up, we're going to take a hard left turn with this Bulgarian SAM 7 SF for side folder, and this is where I'm really going to swap out my collector hat for my armed citizen hat, because this is truly a go-to carbine for me rather than just a collector piece. Before we unpack all that, however, let's go ahead and verify that we are safe and clear. Empty magazine, nothing in the chamber, nothing on the bolt face. Let's go ahead and get a taste of those action sounds. Very smooth action here in a way that only a milled AK can be. As for the trigger, this is a fine group enhanced two-stage trigger. I absolutely love this trigger, and that is because we have a nice, clean light take-up to a very crisp wall and a predictable break through that wall. This is exactly what I want in a trigger. Gets the job done every time. So as I said, when it comes to why I own this particular rifle, it has absolutely nothing to do with its history or provenance. Could we talk about the Bulgarian Circle 10 factory? Absolutely we could. It's one of the most historically significant arms makers of the last century. Could we talk about the AR M9F service rifle that this SAM-7SF is based on? Again, yes, that's a weapon which has seen serious global use and remains in frontline service to this day. But like with the AKM, I think that history would be best saved for another time. And in this case, the reason is actually because none of that has anything to do with why I own this rifle. Is it an added benefit that I totally appreciate and sometimes nerd out on in my own time? For sure. But the reality is that I chose to purchase this specific AK for no motivation other than my reasoned conclusion that I needed a modernized AK in my personal defensive rotation, and this is the AK I chose for that role. So let's break that down just a bit. The thing is, I actually strongly prefer the AR to the AK for practical purposes. I've got more trigger time training and muscle memory on an AR, not to mention I think it's fundamentally a more efficient and capable weapon system. However, as a former U.S. Army small arms repairman, I'm also intimately acquainted with the shortcomings of the AR platform, which for the purpose of this video, we will simply call preventative maintenance burden. I've got a dedicated video on exactly this subject coming soon, so I'll save my long form argument for that video. But for today, let's just say that my preference for the AR is conditional upon logistics support, specifically guaranteed access to specialized tools, workspaces, and replacement parts. Obviously, under normal circumstances, I have access to all those things. The AR is my go-to weapon under normal circumstances. That said, I have a vivid imagination, and consequently, I often find myself trying to prepare for situations which don't fall under the domain of normal circumstances. Specifically, I entertain scenarios which many people might describe using the SHTF label, where I might not have access to the basic logistic support I currently take for granted. And in such a situation, I see the value of having access to and proficiency with a weapon with a lower preventative maintenance burden than the AR. There are a few good candidates for that role, but with my significant stockpiles of 7.62x39 ammunition, the AK platform makes a whole lot of sense for me. So that's why I have an Arsenal SAM-7SF. It's a bomb-proof, no-frills milled AK built by one of the best and most experienced modern AK producers, that being Arsenal Bulgaria. So now let's talk about how I've configured it and how that fits into my complete defensive posture. Pretty simple in terms of configuration, so let's just go ahead and go butt to tip. I've got the folding stock outfitted with a Smokies leather stock wrap. That is because I live in a cold environment, and that minimizes thermal transfer, or put more simply, keeps my cheek weld from becoming permanent in sub-freezing temperatures. Next, we have the thumb-actuated safety lever, which comes straight from the factory that way. I love this feature because, as I mentioned earlier, I am an AR guy, which means I was trained to move and reload with my weapon on safe. This feature makes that ergonomic and efficient in a way that would otherwise require additional modification on most other AKs. We've already talked about the trigger. It's a great trigger and just what I personally want in a fighting carbine. Extended charging handle. Like my VEPR, I think I actually forgot to mention with my VEPR, it has one of these as well, as does this guy when we get here. This is a CRH Customs, formerly known as Circle 10 extended charging handle. I absolutely love these products. This one is unique because it has the undercut for the folding stock. That allows the charging handle to cycle even when the stock is folded. And these are great upgrades. They're low cost, and I talk about these all the time. Again, these are like 25 bucks, but it really adds to the ergonomics and just quality feel of the weapon system. Totally recommend these charging handles. Optic and optic rail, no budget concerns for this guy. I've got one of my personal favorite optics, and in my opinion, the perfect complement to milled AK, and of course that is the Aimpoint Comp M4S. This is a no-frills bomb-proof optic for a no-frills bomb-proof carbine. It's riding on a Midwest Industries full-length Picatinny mount, which I've used for many years and really like. The sling I like to use on this guy is one of my personal favorite slings, the 1 to 2 point Magpul MS3, which works great on AKs just like this. Handguard here is just a drop-in M-lock. It's branded by Kyber Customs, but I'm pretty sure it was made by TDI, just like my VEPR one. I did have to heavily hand fit this to get it to work, but now it feels like it's welded in place, and once again, it is a bomb-proof solution. Obviously, I've got another Arisaka vertical foregrip here, and this time I have Picatinny rail sections at both 9 and at 3 o'clock. And if you're wondering, Triangle, if this is a go-to rifle for you, why don't you have a light on there? And the reason is because of actually how I store and carry this rifle. Because this is something of an SHTF rifle for me, it rides around pretty much everywhere for me, folded up in this Savior Inc. coffin bag. It's sharing that space with a tactically optimized rimfire survival system, aka a night vision optimized suppressed 1022. And just because of the way it fits, I need to leave its dedicated Streamlight ProTac RM1 in a separate pocket, ready to slap on when I need it. Also, if I want to run this rifle under nods, all I need to do is steal the LAM and IR illuminator off my torse, and I can mount those to the 3 and 9 o'clock surfaces. It's not the best night vision rig. We will get to a much better night vision AK in a moment, but it does get the job done. Also in this bag, I carry one loaded 20-round Hungarian tanker mag, but never far off is this modified Chicom chest rig. As you can see, I've sewn on a USGI hydration carrier strap to make it faster to put on, and adjustable over armor, which is a great and cheap upgrade. This carries 3 full-size mags, and I always leave the left one unbuttoned for faster access. Additionally, in lieu of grenades, I like to keep a couple of 10-round mags in the grenade pouches just in case. Finally, I like to throw in some emergency ear pro, a broken shell extractor, which I've never had to use, a front side adjustment tool, and an emergency cleaning kit. Additionally, I also always carry this Savior ink bandolier, which holds another 6 full-capacity magazines, not to mention the wheel well of my car is packed with 7.62x39 battle packs, bringing my total ammunition count to a lot. As one final note, I'll point out that my personal armor setup uses mag pouches which accept AR or AK pattern mags, which means that if I'm in a situation where I get to grab my armor, I can choose whichever weapon is best suited to my circumstances without much reconfiguring. And that's pretty much it for the SAM-7, guys. It's a really neat rifle with great pedigree and provenance, but at least for now, I own it as a working rifle, and that's exactly how I treat it. All right, next up is going to be my night vision optimized Serbian-made Izhevsk ZPAP M70. I won't go into crazy detail on this rifle because I actually have a dedicated video on exactly this rifle, link in the description if you want to check that out. First things first, however, let's go ahead and verify this weapon is safe. It's an empty magazine, that's an empty chamber, and we got nothing on the bolt face. Much rougher action on this rifle. Not sure if that came across in the audio. Not a problem at all, just worth noting. Trigger here is what I would describe as dangerously light and unpredictable. It's long, spongy. There's just little tiny light catches along the way. And yeah, that's kind of a nightmare trigger. Honestly, this is still a build in progress. I'm waiting for my suppressor for this guy. So until I get that, I've kind of put it to the side, but I really do need to get this trigger swapped out before that suppressor comes in because I don't like that trigger at all. So what can I say about this rifle without repeating what I've already said in a 23-minute video? I guess what I can say is that this was a build of opportunity because I actually bought this particular AK with the intention of having it be a collector piece. I am personally a huge fan of Yugoslavian small arms. I used to have a fairly comprehensive Yugo collection, although unfortunately that collection has dwindled significantly as it competed with my other interests. In any case, I originally had this set up as a loose facsimile of a Yugo M70B1, and in that configuration, it was the closest thing I had to a basic AKM. It wasn't until I got the real AKM that I started thinking about getting rid of the ZPAP, but in classic gun enthusiast fashion, I managed to talk myself out of getting $1,000 by selling this and instead spending $1,000 by turning this into a night vision optimized AK. And that's pretty much it, guys. I won't run part by part on this, but I'm sure you get a good idea of what it's about just by looking at it. I guess the only other thing I'll point out is that due to the Yugoslavian obsession with rifle grenades, this modern Serbian AK incorporates the 1.5mm receiver and bold reinforced front trunnion of the RPK, which means that it is the second technical RPK variant in my collection. When we factor in that my SAM-7 has a milled receiver, and we haven't even gotten to this monster yet, I think we can draw the conclusion that I have a thing for thick Slavs. Not saying it's the right choice. In fact, it's probably the wrong choice, but a noteworthy observation all the same. Either way, let's move on and try to wrap this thing up. And here we are at number 5, my final AK, and lo and behold, we got another heavy-assed RPK-based AK variant. What can I say? I have a type. That said, this particular RPK-based AK variant, a Romanian PSL to be specific, probably has the best excuse of all 3 so far because it is, of course, chambered in 7.62 by 54 rimmed, a much more powerful cartridge than 7.62 by 39. So as a brief refresher, the VEPR incorporates RPK reinforcements because it was designed for sustained full auto use, a feature I can't take full advantage of. The ZPAP incorporates RPK reinforcements because it was intended for use with rifle grenades, a feature I can't take full advantage of. And the PSL incorporates RPK reinforcements because it was intended for use with a full power battle rifle cartridge. Finally, a feature I can take full advantage of. And that's one of the really cool things about this rifle is it's the only non-neutered AK variant I own. Everything else you've seen is a semi-automatic version of what is supposed to be a select fire rifle. This is a semi-automatic rifle that's still semi-automatic, and that's great. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and make sure this weapon is safe and clear. Yeah, I want gloves for this. It's an empty magazine. That is an empty chamber, and that is an empty bolt face. All right, let's go ahead and listen to that action. Honestly, a really smooth action, once again for a stamped AK, a Romanian AK for that. And the other thing I'll point out is that you will note I did have to leave the magazine removed to cycle the action because this weapon does have a factory last round bolt hold open, which is pretty cool for an AK. As for the trigger, I have replaced this factory PSL trigger with a fine group enhanced 2-stage trigger, exactly the same trigger, which is in my SAM 7, which I've previously established I like a lot. It works really well. Again, we have that light take up, a clean wall, and then a very clean break. This is a great trigger, and it's particularly useful on a DMR type rifle like this. It is not technically DMR. That is not the way the Romanians used it. However, for my purposes, the way I think about it, it's a DMR. Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, I don't care if it's a DMR triangle. That's not an AK, and if that's you, unfortunately, you couldn't be more wrong. Unlike the Soviet SVD rifle that the PSL was designed to compete with, this Romanian telephone pole is quite literally just a semi-automatic RPK stretched out to accept the 54 rimmed cartridge. Same bolt and carrier, same long stroke gas piston, same fire control group, same magazine interface, same receiver assembly, same sights, same basic furniture interfaces. Really, the only noteworthy differences between this and any other AK are going to be the fact that it's designed from the ground up to be semi-automatic. It has a last round bolt hold open. I just demonstrated that. And it has some additional reinforcements at the rear trunnion, again, to reflect the fact that this isn't 54 rimmed. So what can we say about the PSL? I will try to keep it short. There's some really great history on the PSL. I'm going off script here because I got lazy. Again, with the Ciguatera, I never finished my script because I haven't been feeling well, but I think I can get this off the cuff. Great history on the PSL. In 1968, I want to say, Soviet Union invaded Czechoslovakia, and the Romanians did a very brave thing by refusing to participate in that. It's not brave if you don't suffer consequences, and the Romanians did suffer consequences in the form of being cut off from Soviet materiel and technology. They did not get the Dragunov, so instead they had to make their own weapon to compete with the Dragunov, and in lieu of technological advancements, they just kind of squinted at their AKs and RPKs and said, what if we made it longer? And that's basically what they did. They made a long AK. So in many ways, this weapon is a physical testament to anti-Soviet sentiment, which I totally love. I love the Slavic people. I love the Russian people. I love the Romanian people. But I hate communist governments, and I love it when people stick it to the governments, even if it's commies sticking it to other commies. And this is an example of that. And it's pretty cool, because is it as good as an SVD? No. Does it fill the same role? Yeah, it totally does. Also, these things show up in war zones all the time. Yes, there's tons of SVDs out in the Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia, but you see tons and tons of PSLs. They're used to great effect, and I guess that segues us to how well do these things work? That is a subject of great controversy, especially right now. This is a really fun time to be a PSL owner with a sense of humor, because not so long ago, 9-Hole Reviews, great channel, basically made a video saying the PSL is the worst gun ever made. I'm exaggerating, but if you watch the video, you'll see that I'm not super far off. And then, as was prophesied, the chosen one of the AK community, Robski of AK Operators Union and Vintage Rifle Shooters Club, two of my favorite channels of all time, came through and said, actually, and then just smoked the 9-Hole Reviews Speedway course with his own PSL, demonstrating that in the right hands, when set up, built, and configured properly, these things are not to be taken lightly. Is this an outdated rifle? Absolutely. That's not the debate. If you're looking for a modern DMR or a modern full power battle rifle, this is not your choice. The question is, are these serious weapon systems, or are these just a joke that never should have existed? And as Robski demonstrated, these are totally a serious weapon system. I'm not half as good of a shot as Robski. I'm not half as good of a shot as Henry at 9-Hole. However, I do shoot this guy quite a bit, and the results that I get with my rifle using ball ammunition, I do have the K&S piston, so I can use 174 grains in here. This rifle shoots far better than what you might have seen in the 9-Hole Reviews video. When I do my part and put the right ammo in here, this is a 1.5 MOA gun, and I've gotten groups that were much better than that as well. I will say, in terms of my optic, I do have a heavily customized optic. This is a Belarusian POSP 4x24 DU Pro model. That means it has finer adjustments. That's one of my biggest complaints with the Soviet or Romanian style optics, is they have just crazy big adjustments. It's like 3.5 or 5 centimeters. And these are still big adjustments, but they are small enough to actually get it on target. The problem is they don't make this particular optic with the right size mount. So I've had to hot swap my mount and do all sorts of modifications to this scope base, but I have made it work, and it is a great setup now. And I guess the last thing to say about this is, whatever your opinion on the PSL, this is one of the most fun firearms that I own. Sometimes I think about selling it. It's so overpriced for what it is. I mean, you can get such a badass 308 for the money that I spent for this, that's going to be so much better than this. Again, I'm saying that this is good, but it's not great. You can get so much better of a rifle than this for the money that I've put into this, which is between $2,500 and $3,000 at this point. However, it is so much fun. I cannot emphasize that enough. It is AK, but bigger. It is an AK, one of my favorite actions in 7.62 by 54 rimmed, one of my favorite cartridges. It just puts a smile on my face. It's so satisfying. It's such a fun gun. And every time I think about selling it, I just shoot it one more time and I'm like, why did I consider getting rid of this? This is the most fun gun that I own. And it really might be. One last anecdote I will say about this is these magazines are like 75, 80 bucks a pop, which is crazy. And you might think to yourself, Triangle, if you had magazines that cost 75, 80 bucks a pop, you probably keep track of them, right? I've pretty much never lost magazines in my life, except for one time. And when I did, I lost 4 of these all at once. I have no idea where they went. It boggles my mind. It honestly feels like a grain of sand in my brain to this day. I want to get over it, but there's 4 of these floating out there that belonged to me at one point. I have no idea what I did with them. I like to think that one day they're going to turn up, but it's not looking good. And that's the video, guys. As always, if you found this to be worth the time you spent watching it, entertaining, educational, what have you, please let me know by doing any combination of the YouTube stuff, like, comment, and subscribe. So in classic show and tell video format fashion, my phone died, I got distracted, and I forgot to finish my outro. So thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.